Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's EKU Chautauqua presentation. My name is Eric Liddell, Chautauqua Lecture Series Coordinator, and I am absolutely delighted to be here tonight with world-renowned botanist, educator, and tree climber extraordinaire, the Arbornaut Meg Lowman. Great to see you, Meg, and thank you so much for joining us here at EKU Chautauqua.
Oh, such a pleasure. I'm really excited.
As are we. We're really looking forward to your presentation. And as you can see, I'm also joined here on screen tonight by several wonderful colleagues from the EKU Departments of Biological Sciences, Geosciences, and Natural Areas, Doctors Jennifer Coslow, Kelly Watson, and David Brown. So hi again to you all, and thank you for being here as well. In just a moment, I will hand the screen over to Meg, and the rest of us will drop off and return for the Q&A and discussion portion following Meg's presentation. And viewers out there, I know there are many of you already saying hi to us, including JB Spock and Madison, Chloe, Stephen, Ellie, Jason, Michaela, and Nick. Good to see you out there, Nick. Hope you're doing well. We encourage you all to submit comments and questions right there in the YouTube chat for me to share with Meg and the panel following the presentation. You can find Meg's full bio in the notes below the screen, so I'll just say a couple of words here by way of introduction. Dr. Margaret Lowman, known affectionately throughout the world as Canopy Meg, is a global pioneer in forest canopy ecology, a tireless educator, strong advocate for girls, women, and minorities in science. Meg has given feature talks around the world to every type of audience. She's the author, co-author, and editor of 9 books and over 150 scientific publications, including the major textbooks, Forest Canopies and Methods in Forest Canopy Research, as well as field reports with titles like Life in the Treetops and It's a Jungle Out There. Her most recent book is the just published and much anticipated memoir, The Arbornaut, detailing her life's adventures spent exploring the treetops of forests across nearly all of the continents, plus some moss in Antarctica, as I recall. I got through the first several chapters already this week, and I happened to be reading that in our own little forest preserve, Camp Catalpa here in Richmond, and it was a great environment to read your book, and it's just fantastic. So I recommend it to everyone out there, and you'll get a flavor of what's in the book tonight from Meg's wayfinding Chautauqua presentation, because it's the subject of her presentation tonight. So without further ado, welcome again, Meg Lowman to EKU Chautauqua. Go ahead and take it away, and we'll see you back here in a little bit.
Hey, thank you, Eric, and all the faculty. Such a pleasure to be here. I wish I could come up in person and see all of your trees, but maybe another year. And I hope you can see the screen by now, but I am excited tonight to take you into the treetops a little bit and share some of the wisdom, I hope, from my book, The Misadventures, which I call it, when I failed miserably to do the right thing or be an aggressive woman in science through a lot of my career. And maybe some of my stories will benefit all of you as students and as people juggling career and family or whatever it takes. So with that, I will figure out how to advance the slides, which is important. Oh yeah, here we go. They're advancing, which is great. I did, start out the book talking a little about my childhood. It's kind of embarrassing because I was this geek kid. And, in the 1960s, the word geek didn't exist, but I loved nature. Most of my girlfriends wanted to curl their hair with rollers or have slumber parties. And I wanted to get up early and go bird watching and collect wildflowers and press them in telephone books, which in those days used to be these big fat paper things. So lo and behold, I did at a very young age enter my wildflower collection in the 5th grade science fair for New York State and got a second prize, which for a shy kid was probably akin to the Nobel Prize, but it made me excited. It made me think, you know what, maybe girls can do field biology, even though I didn't realize that I was embarking upon this next to impossible career. But I think to myself, my one advice to girls is be a little bolder than I was and be a little smarter than I was and maximize your opportunities. But for me, this wildflower collection was kind of part of my upbringing. And I do talk in my book about the importance of how so many biologists collected things when they were little, and it led to this amazing career. So this was my backyard in rural upstate New York. Of course, no movie theaters, not too many TV channels, no internet in those days. So a lot of what I learned came from these amazing trees that change color at this time of year, where probably they are in your neighborhood too. But I was absolutely flabbergasted by that. But I thought every tree in the world did that. And lo and behold, when I went to college and heard that tropical rainforests stay green all year, I couldn't believe it. So it became a dream for me to go to the tropics someday and figure out what in the heck were their leaves doing, which was so different from my upstate New York leaves. No one in my family did science. I always feel it's honest for me to confess this. We have a big family tree. There's a little town called Lowman, New York, where the railway used to come between New York City and Buffalo, New York. And lo and behold, the only person that came close to science was my grandfather, who during the Prohibition figured out a different use for his corn, which was making some whiskey. And the Lowman whiskey, I gather, had a pretty good reputation in the 1920s, but I never tasted it myself. So that was the closest thing anyone in my family ever came to being a botanist until I came along. And the other kind of thing I learned during my childhood was, in a small town, most people stay there and most people don't move away. And there was only one other person in my hometown who was my next door neighbor, and his name was Tommy Hilfiger. And lo and behold, this crazy guy in high school ended up, of course, creating a fashion empire. And so I say to kids whenever I give talks, follow your passion. Tommy loved blue jeans and he loved looking at clothing. I loved nature. And, I guess if I could really change my ways, I should have been a fashion designer because it has a much bigger paycheck. But at the same time, both of us marvel on the fact that we grew up in the same part of the world in this little tiny town as next door neighbors. And he went on for a fashion empire. That's his sister next to him, who's my best friend still. And I went on to save trees. So think about what you love and maybe it can become a career. So my career, of course, was being one of the world's first arbornauts, which is a crazy word. Astronauts, of course, explore outer space, and that all started in the 1960s when NASA first went to the moon. Aquanauts explore undersea, which actually started in the 1950s when we invented scuba gear. But nobody explored the tops of trees, even in their own backyards, until the 1980s. And that's when a couple of us coined this term called arbornaut, meaning explorers of the treetops. And here you can see a group of pictures of me and some of my colleagues doing our thing, using the toolkit for canopy biology, ropes, harnesses, or canopy bridges, or aerial walkways, as we call them, hot air balloons and inflatables, and maybe even sometimes climbing at night because we're trying to find things like the bugs that avoid being eaten by birds during daytime. So lots of amazing things. But the most important thing for founding a new science, which in my case I was able to do, is creating the tools that are useful to making the discoveries. And that probably occupied about 50% of my time as a scientist. So one of the most amazing things that happened to me when we climbed up into the treetops, and a handful of my colleagues around the world, is, holy cow, half of the species on the planet, on the land part of our planet, live in the tops of trees. So that's extraordinary. And it's a little scary because foresters for over 100 years walked on the forest floor and only saw the canopy when they cut the tree down. And even then, they probably didn't see much because the bugs were squished and the birds flew away and the mammals probably nimbly went to the next tree. So we never had a very good knowledge of the whole tree until a few of us arbornauts created this toolkit in the 1980s. And what did we find? Amazing things like sloths that live in the tops of trees 90% of their life, or even little cute things like water bears, where 10 of them could fit on your little finger. But these guys live in the droplets of water on leaves, on moss, on lichens, on tree bark. And lo and behold, they're probably the commonest species in any tree in your neighborhood, but yet you may have never seen them because they're microscopic, or heard of them because very few people study them. And so we have all these crazy things happening in the canopy that nobody knows about. So here's a little timeline. It's kind of the basis for the book because I want to walk you quickly through how this crazy field of canopy biology started and where did arbornauts make their beginning. And it was all back in 1979 when I actually was a grad student at Sydney University in Australia on a scholarship, which is kind of why I went there. And I wanted to look at this whole tree thing. I wanted to figure out, why don't these leaves turn red and fall off? And in the rainforests of Australia, the leaves were green all year round. So I thought, this will be an easy PhD thesis. I could get a hammock, I could lie on the forest floor, and I could watch leaves fall and count them, and it would be the end of my data collection. But not so easy as it turned out. I did, in the end, sew a harness using an industrial sewing machine and seatbelt webbing. I borrowed ropes from the Sydney University Caving Club. I welded a slingshot from a piece of metal in the university shop. And in turn, I used it to pull a fish line over the treetops, and then a nylon blind cord, and then finally my strong climbing rope so that it wouldn't break. But that slingshot was essential for getting the ropes up into the tree. And then I found out, wow, I could study a lot in the treetops with ropes and harnesses, but what if I want to take a whole team up there? I started leading citizen science trips for Earthwatch, a group, an NGO in Boston. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't take everybody up on one rope or we'll all fall, which would be crazy. So lo and behold, with an ecotourist lodge, we designed the first canopy walkway in Queensland that actually allows groups of people to be in the treetops at one point in time. And then I came back to the States. You'll have to read about it in the book and find out why I came back to the States. But lo and behold, I became part of a global committee that used canopy cranes. We had about 10 of these structures to place in forests around the world. And so we did just that. And that's another tool in the toolkit for canopy science. I also was a professor at Williams College at the time, so I built the first canopy walkway in North America in the Williams College campus forest, which was really exciting. All my students discovered new species. They all got great scholarships to grad school because of that. So it was a really exciting time for canopy research in college campuses. And I also got commissioned to be part of expeditions using inflatables, even though I was the only girl, by the way, and that was a bit demeaning, but I'm happy that I was, because I think I paved the way for more women to participate in these kinds of field expeditions. And with these inflatables designed by the French, we went to Cameroon, we went to French Guiana, Gabon, Australia, a couple other places are now under our belts, which was fabulous because this is the only method that really gets you to the absolute tippy top of the highest trees, which is pretty cool. I came back to the States, of course, after being at Williams College. I moved to Florida to become a botanical garden director and built the first public canopy walkway down here in Florida. It's still going strong. I invite all of you to come to Sarasota and visit it. It's fabulous. It gives you access to live oaks and palms. We have a pretty simple forest down here, but lots of amazing epiphytes, things like orchids and bromeliads and resurrection fern. And it's just a really wonderful, special nature experience to go into the treetops. So much so that it led me to write the last chapter of the book called Mission Green and create some solutions to deforestation, which I'll talk about in a minute. So with that, I started a foundation because we needed a vehicle for fundraising to build these canopy walkways. And finally, just a couple months ago, I published my memoir called The Arbornaut, where I tell you everything, maybe more than you'd like to know, because it was really humbling to be a girl in science in the 1980s. And it was not always easy to be the only woman on field expeditions, but I hope my stories will inspire a lot of girls as well as boys to seek careers in science. So that's the book. It's just out. I'm blessed because my friend Jade Goodall has referenced it, and there are great reviews by everyone from Peter Raven at Missouri Botanical Gardens to Tommy Hilfiger, my old next door neighbor. So do hopefully read the book if you can, and I just hope and pray it will give you some optimism for the future of our forests, as well as some darn good stories about how it is to climb trees for a living. So in the book, I have a couple take-home messages that I'll share with this audience. You know, one is that trees are worth zillions of dollars, and most businessmen don't understand the value of trees. So in my career, as I increasingly talk to business school alumni or graduate school classes that are involved in economics, I realize it's so important to explain to people how many millions of dollars trees bring into their community every year by cleansing water through their foliage to make fresh water, by producing oxygen from their leaves, by providing sustainable timber, food, and clothing if we treat trees properly, by conserving soil through their roots instead of letting all those soil particulates get into streams and go into the ocean and be wasted. Trees, as you already know, are home to half of the Earth's genetic library, which makes it extraordinarily important. And big trees store carbon in a huge way, which is really helping us offset climate change. And I'll talk about that in a minute as well. Trees do control our climate. The Amazon has more ability to control the rainfall patterns, the temperature, the atmospheric conditions, all across North America by virtue of this large forest tract with its own little rainfall patterns and its own ability to really impact the world. Finally, number 10, guess what? For 2 billion people, trees and forest tracts are the spiritual heritage. In Ethiopia, in Madagascar, in India, in most of Africa, in so many places, trees are this extraordinarily inspirational thing that helps people think about their religion and their way of life and make us also appreciative. So I'm still hoping that some economist can help me come up with the value of a prayer, because I go to forests in Ethiopia and I pray with the priests a lot before I do my conservation work. And I'm thinking we need to value prayer and religion as part of our forest economic planning. Another thing that's really personal to me and passionate to me is getting girls as well as young boys engaged in science. This is the Meg Lowman Treetops Camp in the left two pictures. It's located in my hometown where the economic status is very depressed. So all of these girls need help to develop their own personalities, their own courage, and etc. So we have this amazing Meg Lowman Treetops Camp, funded in part by Tommy Hilfiger, but mentored by me. And on the right are third graders in my canopy walkway here in Sarasota, Florida, where guess what? By making observations in their school notebooks, they discovered a new species of weevil and they got published in the scientific literature. So anyone can be a scientist if you use your five senses, which I think is as important a lesson as following your passion that I talked about earlier with Tommy Hilfiger and myself. So little life lessons that you might bring away from this lecture, I surely do humbly hope. All kids need trees. I would ask you to raise your hand if you ever climbed a tree, and probably a lot of you will, but there's something in us maybe because we're related to primates, that makes everyone smile and nod and feel happy when they think about climbing a tree. So one of my other passions has been helping minority students and underprivileged students gain access to science. And one of the most disadvantaged is, of course, mobility limited students who never get invited to be canopy biologists and never get invited to be field biologists in general. They're usually told, just stay indoors and do what you can behind a computer screen. So for 5 summers in a row, I had funding from National Science Foundation to get kids who are mobility limited into the treetops. And we did just that. And guess what? They all discovered new species of water bears, because I knew that water bears had not really been explored in temperate forest canopies. And lo and behold, did we find water bears? Oh my gosh, you'll have to read my book to hear all the statistics and all the fun discoveries that we made in these canopies with these fabulous kids that vaulted out of their wheelchairs into the treetops. So these canopy walkways, as well as other methods to access the treetops, are now changing our ability to conserve forests. And I want to talk a little bit about my final project in life. I will go to the grave with this project called Mission Green that I will talk about in a minute, but it deploys the construction of canopy walkways to save forests, to hire local indigenous people, especially women, and to promote research on the biodiversity in these unexplored areas. So here's a fabulous walkway we just finished in Malaysia. This walkway was so amazing that I hosted a BioBlitz, meaning a biodiversity survey, with over 100 scientists 2 years ago. And we found over 1,500 species in this little forest tract. So much so that the UNESCO, United Nations group, declared this area a biological world heritage, meaning its forest is saved in perpetuity. Thanks to the canopy, thanks to the research in the walkway, we can now say this. So we're modeling this kind of success story into other forests that are equally endangered and need our help. Another one is the Amazon. Here's a walkway we finished in the Amazon a decade or so ago, but there's no funding for signage, for education activities. So we are fundraising through my new Mission Green project to help this walkway get the state of the art in education and also market it so that people, when their kids graduate from high school, would love to come to the Amazon treetops more than go to Disney or more than go to Paris or places that might be there for the millennia. But this canopy walkway in the Amazon might have a very limited lifetime based upon how humans are treating our forests at this point in time. So here's a case study in the book. There are about 5 chapters with different case studies to help you internalize and personalize different forest issues and activities. And one of my favorites, but most depressing, is the Ethiopian forests. You can see this picture where the last little fragment of forest is actually in the churchyard. There's the round Ethiopian Coptic church, and the priests believe they are the stewards of all of God's creatures. Whereas as a conservation biologist, I believe I am the steward of biodiversity. So guess what? I've come together with a very powerful and trusting relationship with the priests of Ethiopia to save their last forests. And here's how Ethiopia looks from the air. You can see these little tiny green dots surrounded by subsistence agriculture. Very scary indeed, because there's not a lot of hope. Here's all the native insects, all the native animals, all the native birds living in these little green dots. And of course, the priests don't have Google Earth and they don't have computers. And so they don't see this landscape as we do. And part of my job in helping save Ethiopia's forests is to educate the priests so they know that in the next valley, it's equally desolate and cleared as in their own valley, because otherwise they don't have a national picture of the degradation of their landscape. So here's what we're doing. This is the chief priest and me, and we have signed in blood practically to pray together, to plant trees together, to save big trees together. And we are so excited about how science and religion can get together and hopefully save the last 4% of forests in Ethiopia, which isn't very much, to be honest. So how are we doing this? Well, we have two things that are working, and they're very inexpensive, but very powerful. One is, of course, I'm trying to give lectures to all of the priests throughout the country so that they see the Google Earth images and they understand the real value of their little tiny tracts of forest. And the second thing is to build these beautiful stone walls using the stones from the farms, which the farmer appreciates because they really do impede their agriculture, and then working with the priests to build these walls around their forests so that we can keep the cattle out, we can make a boundary, we can make sure that the trees inside have a beautiful, safe life, and we can in turn preserve all the biodiversity of Ethiopia in these genetic libraries called church forests. At the same time, I'm really concerned about the kids there. They will grow up and become priests. They will grow up and not have too much understanding of their own forests and biodiversity unless we can give them some environmental education activities. So I've been really busy trying to think of ways that we can help them. No computer programs, no libraries in the school. We have to come up with different tools to educate these kids about the value of their amazing birds and animals and insects. So one thing I've done is write a book in their language. It's a children's book, it's fiction, but it's based on fact, where a little girl helps to save some of the church forests in her region. And we give this book away for every time an American buys the book in English called Beza, Who Saved the Forest of Ethiopia, One Church at a Time. We print a copy in Amharic, the Ethiopian language, and distribute it to kids in the rural schools over there, which is probably one of the most joyful things I've ever done in my life, giving a child the first book he or she has ever owned, because they don't have libraries and they don't have bookstores and they don't have access to any kind of books. So this book is almost like a magic elixir to help the kids learn about their value of the forests. We also are doing research there, but very carefully. We don't want to threaten the priests in any way who value their forests for spiritual reasons, but we're finding out all of the amazing biodiversity there funded by National Geographic. And at the same time as we're conserving the forests, we're finding out the value of the forests, which is of course really important because the forests are their medicines, their paints, their products for almost every kind of activity in the villages. So we do need to understand the dynamics of these church forests to help the people live sustainable and productive lives. Here's one of our walls, and my wonderful partner, Alamahu Wasi Ashete. Nothing can happen in any country of the world without having trusted local partners. So I've been very blessed to have this colleague work with me side by side. And here today is one of our first successful church forest walls surrounding a forest called Zada outside of Bahir Dar. And you can see this amazing 5-kilometer wall is keeping the beautiful greenery inside and protecting all the wildlife and not returning it into that desolate agricultural area that you can see on the outside. So this is a challenge for all of us. How are we going to deal with these countries that can't afford conservation like America can or Europe? But we need to face this challenge because trees keep us alive, literally and figuratively. So I want to end talking about the last chapter of my book called Mission Green. It's a program I launched last year to use my Canopy toolkit to save forests, to use women and children and families to become the stewards of these canopy walkways and earn sustainable income through ecotourism, and hopefully in the end also fund students to do research in these treetop environments. So I'm basing this on a friend of mine's program. Sylvia Earle is a very senior oceanographer who started a program called Mission Blue, where she wanted to bring attention to the global hope spots, as she called them, places in the ocean with high biodiversity. And since 2010, she has now identified over 100 hope spots and inspired the local people to try to help save them. So I want to do the same thing with land hotspots, as I call them. And my partner in crime has been a wonderful, famous biologist called Edward O. Wilson at Harvard, who wrote a book called Half Earth, where he said, what if we save half the earth for 99% of the species and leave the other half for Homo sapiens or humans? And with Ed, we've identified the 15 or so forests that are the most endangered. And hopefully we want to build canopy walkways there so that the genetic library of these forests can be preserved and the indigenous people can gain successful and sustainable income. So I have a fabulous world-class group of experts advising me on this project. And they're all just amazing. You can go on my website, www.treefoundation.org, and look up Mission Green and find out more about these people. And we have a budget and a plan that in the next 10 years, we need to save the forests of the Amazon. We need to go into Madagascar, Mozambique, India, and Bhutan, and as well as our subtropical Florida and the redwoods of California, to create these walkways to save these genetic libraries while we can. And fortunately, some of them are already successful. We have a walkway in Malaysia, which I showed you, funded by a corporate structure. We have a fabulous walkway in the Amazon, but no marketing and no education programs. So we hope to develop those with funding over the next few years. We are going to Madagascar next April to design and fund a walkway there because they have less than 4% of their native forests left. And it's really, really important to save lemurs and many other species in Madagascar. So stay tuned while we do all of these important things, and maybe you can become part of it. This is an emergency. This is not something like restoring paintings or translating, different, novels into different languages that might last forever. But these forests need our help within the next decade, or it will be too late. So I'm very optimistic and hopeful that we can raise $10 million in 10 years to fund the 10 most important forests in the world, to be this genetic library for our children and grandchildren. So share the word if you have forests or knowledge of people that might want to support forest conservation. I would love to hear from you. But in the meantime, as students, as faculty, I hope all of you are doing your best to keep this planet healthy, because it's a really, really critical issue right now, and nothing is more important probably than the planetary health. And saving trees is so easy. Saving big trees stores carbon and produces oxygen and medicines and does amazing things for us. All we have to do is leave these forests alone, and they do their work for us. So we are very blessed if we can possibly save these big trees while it's possible. So thank you so much. And if you want more knowledge, you can read my book, and I hope you enjoy it. And at the same time, I'd be so happy to answer questions through my websites, both my personal website, canopymeg.com, or my foundation website, treefoundation.com. And with that, I might go back to Eric and entertain some questions from all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Meg, for that wonderful presentation, sharing your story and your work and your experiences and your vision, and especially at the end, your strategy, right, and the mission, and that there's hope and ways for people to get involved, right? Very productive ways for people to get involved. And I know we have a lot of interested parties out there. I want to encourage people who are watching to share some more comments and questions. And since we've already had a couple, as my colleagues rejoin us on screen, I will go ahead and share a couple of those comments and questions for you, Meg, and then turn to David and Kelly and Jen. Anna Lee just made a comment, while you were speaking, kind of pursuant to the notion of the the value, the spiritual value of trees. And I love that whole point about including the grand notion, right? The grand calculation of economy in the ecology of trees. But she talks about Shinrin Yoku, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but the Japanese term for forest bathing, which is something, many of us, I think, have heard a lot about lately. And this has been very important for me personally, getting through the pandemic. And she just urges everyone to go among trees for the emotional and psychological value. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Sure, I'd love to, because I just did a talk in Asia on Zoom, of course, with the founder of the forest bathing program, a doctor from Japan who is actually Chinese, but he lives in Japan. And I will say he's making a fortune from all of these 65 institutions that have forest bathing for Japanese people. I said to him, well, couldn't you give a little to conservation? I'm waiting to hear from him. But, it's become a very lucrative activity over in Asia, which is so interesting. But on the side of all of us who don't maybe go to these official places and pay a lot of money to go in these special sanctuaries, anybody and everybody should go to the forest and seek your beautiful spiritual value. And I think that's what I see in so many countries. I actually pay homage to the fig in my book, which is one of the trees that feeds millions of species and is a sacred tree in India and Asia, and even in a lot of parts of South America. There are these special trees and special forests that people feel are very, very spiritual. And I think it's great if more students and more young people as well as old people seek the forest for this stewardship. And guess what? The oxygen there's got to be better than any place else.
Yeah, and it's good for your blood pressure and your well-being and your relationships, everything. So thank you for that. Well, kind of connecting to that, this notion, you said that, you wish that the forest bathing tourism sector would give more to conservation. There's a question here from Sean, sort of analogously, about how you feel about treehouse tourism as an economic driver for conserving forests globally. Does it have both pluses and minuses?
Right. Great question. And there, the biggest treehouse resort in the world is in Oregon, by the way. I did speak out there and it was amazing. There were 42 tree houses and people pay a lot of money to go there. Both tree houses and canopy walkways obviously invade the forest. And I always say to people, there's a trade-off here. You either leave a forest and it probably will get clear cut, or you might build a canopy walkway and create an income stream for the local people that's not clear cutting, and you might disturb 1 or 2% of the species. And with a canopy walkway, they're actually less invasive than trails on the forest floor, which crush the roots and crush a lot of the biodiversity, the seedlings and all of the ground flora, whereas these treetop trails don't do too much except for these odd post holes in the ground. So they really are quite benign. But we also have to realize that, yes, there's probably a few mammals that are shy when people walk through the treetops. It doesn't disturb insects or plants, that's for sure. And yet I always think about the alternative would be if the forest has no income for the local people in any way, shape, or form except logging, then we're probably assured of losing the forest. So I'm all for tree houses and canopy walkways is the best way to save forests to the highest degree of conservation.
Well, immediately building upon that, let me share one more question that came in from our colleague, Stephen Richter, and then I'll turn it over to some of those on the screen here. Stephen says, we'd love to get kids and adults into the canopy of Appalachian forests for learning and ecotourism in, what is in many places an economically depressed region. Do you have suggestions for the first steps in planning or getting funding to support that type of activity?
Right. Absolutely. And I did this down here in Florida, and maybe go on my website and have a look at the Mayaca State Park Canopy Walkway. This walkway was built in a state park. Every citizen donated a couple dollars. It was an amazing community project. Sarasota is economically more stable probably than your region, but they're trying to do one in my hometown of Elmira, New York, which is probably very parallel in terms of being economically underserved. And I do think they'll succeed. It only takes one or two businesses or corporate sponsors to build something. I have a great engineer that lives in Boone, North Carolina. It's not that far away from you. And there's another company in Atlanta, Georgia. So if you end up getting a little bit of seed money or funding where you say, you know what, we have $5,000 or $10,000 where you could fund the designers to come in and have a look at your forest and help design for a price tag. I mean, the one here in Florida cost us $150,000. That's a lot for some communities, but it's probably not a lot for some businesses who might get a tax deduction, or maybe even a foundation that believes in educating your young people. So I think it's all possible. Where there's a will, there's a way. And yet the walkway in Malaysia costs $2 million. So you can, absolutely have this incredible diversity of costs, but you don't need a $2 million walkway. And I will add, the Great Smokies is one of the highest biodiversity areas in the US. So we need a walkway there.
Yeah, and it's the most visited national park. So, you've got a lot of people who'd be interested in that and could maybe, help recoup some of the cost.
Yes,
in any case, thank you for all of that. I'm sure our colleagues here and out there are taking notes on all of that. Let me turn it over to either Kelly or David or Jen. I'm sure they've got some comments and questions as well. And then there are lots of other questions on the YouTube chat. Dave?
I can jump in and ask a question. In the eastern United States, as you know, the forest historically, natural disturbances were a really important part of the forest ecology and community. And many of those disturbances, like natural fires, are no longer occurring. And so the forest is kind of changing in a lot of ways. And as humans, we now are in a position where we need to be managing the forest by kind of recreating some of these disturbances that would have occurred historically in a natural way. And but what that often means is that we have to cut trees and create disturbances or introduce prescribed fires. And the public, at least, often kind of looks at that type of management from a negative perspective and doesn't understand why we sometimes need to cut trees and use prescribed fire. And I'm just wondering, how do you promote trees and the value of trees, but at the same time get people to understand that sometimes you might have to remove certain types of trees, especially in terms of species.
That's a great thought and a great point. And I think it all adds up to how we need to educate the public more about forests and trees, as with other natural systems. People don't understand that. So the canopy walkway as a structure could become this education tool where people gain knowledge about that kind of thing. The same way that I give talks sometimes to business school alumni in classes, and they don't even understand that a tree provides oxygen for them or cleanses their water or does anything. Like, the amount of knowledge that most people have about trees is not very large compared to other things that we know more about. We probably know more about cars and airplanes than we do about trees. So I do think that it just begs that point of how can we educate people? And yes, because of human populations living in forests, we now have to manage them a little differently from how they used to behave in the wild. And that's part of the education process. And it is really important. And I think part of the problem is still in many cases, maybe we're cutting things down that we don't need to, and then it makes it harder for people who need to cut a few things down to do so. When people read about the Amazon, they become very averse to cutting any tree down. They don't quite understand that it might apply differently back in their temperate forests. So education, 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 I guess, is the name of the game right now.
Thank you. Jen and Kelly, feel free to just unmute and pop in if you have a question. Kelly, I see. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Meg. That was really great. So I think the work that you're doing in Ethiopia is really wonderful. And especially as a person who is really passionate about environmental education, I think that is really wonderful that you're working there. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about with the areas around the church forests, what is driving all of the loss of that forest? And I'm guessing that, as depressing as it is, we have a role to play in that. And I don't know, could you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking that. And it is a wonderful project. And I would beg of you to give me environmental education ideas. The book is one thing, but I'm still seeking these innovative ways. How do we educate those kids who don't have schools with electricity or pencils or libraries? It's a really big challenge. And I think, the projects in Ethiopia are driven by the fact that, well, first of all, they don't have anything more than subsistence agriculture. They don't have tractors, they don't have metal tools, they don't have irrigation. So what they've done is cleared so much land to grow a very small modicum of crop. They just don't have any of the advances. And I hate to say it, but the Gates Foundation and all these other wonderful places have not really reached the hinterlands of Ethiopia to help them provide advanced agricultural methods. So for them to feed their 5 kids, which they need to, harvest the crops and walk the oxen into the crops to, plant the seeds, they're going to have to plant more area. So they've cut down more trees and made more clearing. And it's kind of evil begetting evil, because they clear more to provide the agriculture to feed their families, but the agriculture isn't nearly as advanced as the rest of the world. So in some ways, to save the trees of Ethiopia, we need the agricultural community to catch up in some of these developing countries with the advanced technologies that would allow them to harvest more on smaller amounts of land. And it's really very sad, because there's this thing called the energy footprint where, people say to me, oh, shame on those Ethiopians. How can they have 5 kids? It's disgusting. But, as far as using energy, 1 American equals 17 Ethiopians. In other words, we use so much more. We are so much more greedy with Earth's resources that they don't, use anything compared to us. So they are very deserving to do what they do. But at the same time, they're losing their native biodiversity, their native trees. And of course, when the landscape's all agricultural, it gets eroded, it gets dry, and the climate change is wreaking havoc on their landscape much more than ours, which is very scary.
Thank you for that. There was a question out there from Courtney, which touched upon similar issues. I'll just, I guess, extract one element from it to ask you to expand upon a little more. And you did touch upon it, what our role is in terms of the global economy driving those changes. What types of things can we do to help get the technology there, to get, changes within their understanding of, the food system? What more could you say about that in response to Courtney's question?
Obviously, if you have connections to any kind of corporate structure, that would be fantastic. We need John Deere over there with tractors, and we need, great irrigation systems, which we might not have. But because we're all pretty average citizens, I'm guessing for the most part, that's where I, challenge all of you and say, okay, I wrote a book and I'd love you to buy the book Beza so we can distribute books to Ethiopian kids. And, we need to come up with these kind of on the ground organic projects where we can really help people do good things. We're fundraising for these stone walls, which cost about, $6 a square meter or something relatively inexpensive. But again, we've raised about $500,000 to save the 20 highest biodiversity forests in Ethiopia. We need another $500,000 to save the other 20. We have 40 forests earmarked as the highest diversity forests. These kind of organic projects actually go a long way, because the priests love it, the locals love it, the people love it, and it doesn't always require millions of dollars to help these people turn the situation around. But it takes a little of our technology. It takes a lot of our trust and willingness to be there and pray with them or sit with them or do things that are maybe not quite that culture that's aggressive that we might think that we need to have. So I've learned a lot of lessons by, trying to adopt the gentle behavior of the priests in my dealings with them. But every culture and every country needs something different. And when we go to Madagascar, I have a different local community that's been there and worked there and has the trust of the people. And hopefully we'll be able to use local construction people. We'll be able to hire local people when we build the walkway there. It will not only, save the lemurs and help people discover their species in the canopy, but it'll give the people a lot of sense of pride. So it is quite an amazing, I think, complexity, this business of going into a country where it's not your homeland, developing the trust, creating the innovative ways to help with the conservation that might not be the types of things we do here.
Thank you. Jen, feel free to jump in if you wish, but I'll kind of shift gears here and throw out a question from Angel, which I'm glad I scrolled back and saw. It was sitting there prior. Do you have a favorite tree? And if so, why? Sorry, not what. If so, why? And I think I know the answer to this because I read the chapter in your book.
I love it. So Angel, I hope you will get my book and read it, because yes, my favorite tree is definitely the fig. Ficus is a genus. Of course, there are some 700 kinds of figs. And I love figs for a couple of reasons. One is they produce those fabulous fruits that really and truly are eaten by millions of organisms. So I view the fig as like the earth mother of trees, because it houses species, it feeds species, it nurtures species. But the other cool thing about figs that I talk about in my book is there's a group of figs called the banyans or the strangler figs that actually start their life in the top of the tree, because a fig bird eats the seeds and poops it out, and lo and behold, the roots come down from the top of the tree, whereas every other seedling on earth starts its life at the bottom of the forest, where there's 1% light and a lot of struggle to get enough water and enough light to grow into a big tree. But the strangler figs have this guaranteed successful life because they start life at the top. And I use that analogy in my chapter talking about women in science and all of the crazy, awful things that happened to me in my career, because I think if I thought like a fig, if I'd been a little more strategic about how to use my resources more efficiently, maybe I would have been more successful or wasted less time in my career trajectory. So I always love the fig because it's a beautiful example of a successful tree group.
Thank you. I guess I actually haven't got to that chapter in the book yet.
Oh, okay.
I thought you were going to say the birch.
All right. I know. I thought you thought that too, but wait till chapter 6.
I'm glad I've got that to look forward to then in the book. I've got 3 questions here that are kind of interrelated and build on each other. So let me kind of put them together. From Meta J and Madison and Sarah, what issues did you run into revolving around being a woman in the field of science? I mean, you alluded to that. How did you overcome that adversity, especially in a period like the 80s, 70s and 80s? And, what was it like paving your own way through all of that?
Yeah, nice. Thanks, guys, for asking that question. For number one, yes, I didn't fix it. I didn't do very well at all. And I will be honest that, I was the one that made the coffee at the faculty meetings or organized the food on the field trips, because that's what women did. And it never dawned on me that I should have had equal standing with the males. And I was usually the only woman on so many expeditions. So I felt grateful that I was there, but I never realized my power or exerted equity when I should have. So I hope that my book will help women who read it. In fact, that's really why I wrote it, is in hopes that those crazy tales that I tell might be useful for women to get examples of how to do things better. And I hope for men too, because I'm the mother of 2 boys. And I think, boys can learn about how women feel, and it will make for better equity at the leadership table in the end game. But honestly, I did a terrible job. And part of that chapter about the figs, I explain, that if my dream could come true, it would be to tell all women to be brave and bold and don't be afraid to be smart. I was always afraid to say anything about a success I had because I thought the men would be jealous, or I thought they'd be angry, or they wouldn't promote me because they didn't want me to be equal to them. And the other thing I say to women is women need to support women. There's still a little bit too much I think catfighting, or women haven't learned in all cases how to be as supportive of each other as I view men. Men go to the pub, or they play golf, or they do this or that after work, and women rush home and do the laundry and cook the dinner. And sometimes I think they get a little bit overly competitive between each other, and women just need to help other women succeed. And if we have that kind of activity in the workplace, I think women will be in great shape. So I'm very optimistic they can learn from my mistakes.
Thank you. Jen, you've been sitting very patiently. Would you like to pop in there?
I think that mostly Meg has already addressed the question that I was going to ask, which, I mean, as a successful scientist who started nonprofits and all that, in and of yourself, you could just as by example be inspiring to a lot of people, women or men or anybody. But I wondered, it seems that you have taken a purposeful tact in wanting to be that inspiration. And I really wondered at what point in your life you came to that conclusion. Like, when did you decide that was something you wanted to be a part of your professional activities?
Yeah, I guess I didn't strategically think that way. And again, I wished I had. But what I did remember from my own early career is I had no role models. I only had one woman boss for a year of my career, and then she retired after she hired me. And I had very few women role models in science. Most of them were passed away. Rachel Carson, that I adored, Harriet Tubman, whom I felt was a great naturalist, was long deceased. And I had no women biology teachers all through college, if you could believe it. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it just never dawned on me that should be the case. But then suddenly I'm thinking, here I am sort of working my way doggedly up into a career position surrounded by men. And the only way that maybe I could have women colleagues would be to be the role model for them, or certainly to nurture my women students so they could surpass me, which would be fantastic. And many of them have, because that was the only way to build up the numbers and make a little more equity. But I think it's a challenging time. There's a lot more good statistics about women getting positions as assistant professors or doing this or that, but I still don't see a lot of women really running the show. It'll be interesting if at the climate change meetings we could say, guess what, 50% women were at the decision-making table. I doubt it. I just don't think we're there yet for women to be kind of dominating any of the scientific world at this point in time. We're trying, but you know what, until biology allows men to have the babies, I think we still lose out at a certain point in our career where it's very hard to advance in the 30s. And it's still a tough world, I think, for women to have the metrics that compete with some of the men in certain situations. So I'm ever optimistic, and I hope that every little section of work, my book or Jane Goodall or any women that are working in science can, help women achieve or feel inspired. I'm hopeful that that would just contribute to their career.
Absolutely. And follow your passion, as you said earlier, but also just, in that connection, I want to let viewers out there know, they may be interested that another leading female botanist visited EKU Chautauqua a couple of years ago, Pam Soltis, who I think technically her position is she's the curator of the Museum of Natural History at the University of Florida. And she's got a relatively new book out called something like The Tree of Life, which puts together a lot of information about trees. So, we had her here 3 or 4 years ago, and you should be able to find her talk if you're interested to go back and look at it in the EKU Libraries archives. You can find that on our Chautauqua
Cool.
webpage. So
Thanks.
just
That's
another
good.
sort of, yeah.
I hope she's not the only woman you've had in the last 3 or 4 years.
No, but she's another leading female botanist
That's great.
that we've
Thank
had.
you.
So
That's
yeah.
fantastic. Yeah, I do know Pam. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Are there figs that we can grow in Kentucky?
Oh gosh, great question, because we sure have them in Florida. They don't like frost, so I'm not sure exactly where your elevation is allowing you to have figs, but you could certainly grow them in pots indoors, but you may not. Do you have frost?
Oh yes, we get frost. I think the
Yeah,
typical
sorry.
first frost date is right around this time.
Okay, then I'm afraid you might have to keep them indoors in a pot, but that could still be wonderful.
Yeah.
Some people have had success, and it is a definite range extension growing. There's one species of fig, and maybe Kelly knows the name of it. I don't remember which species it is, but
Celeste, is it the Celeste?
Which one is it?
Celeste.
Okay.
The
So-
Celeste. Yep.
They are, people have been able to grow it in very protective area, like protected.
Right.
It's like on a south facing wall or something.
Nice. So
It's a big risk, right? So, and I have seen people that do grow them outdoors in the summer and then, like you said, pull them in the winter.
nice, great.
I think I heard through family connections. I married into an Italian family that you can, I think, bury a fig tree or something like that in the winter. I may be
Maybe.
confusing that with another type of tree, but I think that they, a lot of Italian immigrants who came over wanted their figs. And so they would grow a fig tree, then they'd wrap it and bury it, under the frost line, I guess, for the
There you
winter.
go. We'll have to do some research on that.
Yeah. So that was Sean that asked that question. So there you go, Sean, a few things for you to experiment with. Let's see, other questions from our panel here, or I'll just alert our viewers that we've got just a couple more minutes if you want to try to get 1 or 2 more questions in. Give you a moment to do that. We've got a bit of a delay here.
Sounds good.
And, I'll take the opportunity at this moment to note that I saw that Wade Davis is on your board of Mission Green. And for viewers out there who missed his presentation earlier this semester, you can still find that on YouTube. It was our opening presentation. And so that's very much worth watching as well.
Wade's a good friend from the Explorers Club, and he's maybe helping to create a walkway up in British Columbia. It's not a high biodiversity, but it certainly is a world of old trees up in the Pacific Northwest. So we'll see what happens up there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll be following the development of that.
Great.
Suzanne says, we have a greenhouse here at EKU. Let's grow some figs.
Yay, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, let's grow some figs and have a fig festival.
Exactly.
And Aramark can make us some fig treats.
Love fig jam. You can do it.
Okay, lots of
We
people
do
are
have
chiming in
one
about
fig
that.
in the greenhouse and in the biology department greenhouse. Yeah.
All right. Yay. That's too
Of course, we
fun.
do have pawpaws that grow wild around here, and
Yes, you sure
people are
do.
crazy about those. I think it might be pawpaw season right now.
Yep, that's kind of your equivalent. That's great.
Okay, well, you do have comments and thanks coming in, but the questions have dried up. So that's my cue to say, once again, thank you so much, Meg
Well,
Lowman,
thank you
for
all.
visiting us here at EKU Chautauqua and speaking with us about your life and your work and your vision, right? Your still vision for Mission Green, and talking about some of the information in the Arbornaut. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's just fantastic. Take it to the woods, bathe in the forest, and read this book. It's like a double whammy of nutrient for the soul. So I encourage viewers out there to do that. We will see you back here at EKU Chautauqua in about a month's time. We have a Native American Heritage keynote speaker coming up named Leanne Simpson, who happens to be a poet and a musician and a novelist and a land-based educator. So there's a bit of a connection and carryover there. So many of our viewers might be interested to tune in for that on November 18th. Thank you again to my colleagues. Thank you again to everybody out there. And thank you most of all to Meg Lowman, and best wishes to you in all of your work. And of course, next year in Madagascar, we hope you get there and have a wonderful visit.
Hey, well, thanks, Eric, and all you students and faculty. I so enjoyed it.
Good night, everybody.